Okay. As we get started today, I wanted to make sure that we got one thing clear, and that is I had a question and over the week here, and some of the terms that are used. Basically, everything that I've been sharing with you kind of goes under the heading of young Earth creationism. So sometimes you hear these different terms about creationism, old Earth creationism, or young Earth. Young Earth is what we're talking about. In other words, a biblical view that God created the world in 6 days, and that what we find in the Bible is actually what it says, that we can, generally speaking, trust the genealogies that are found in the Bible, which will give us a date of around 6,000 years that the earth has been here. Even if you extrapolate some of those genealogies out a little bit further, you can't get much more than 10,000 years. So that's typically what we're saying when what we've been talking about in here is a young earth creation. So when you hear that term, it's not a whole nother topic. It's that God created the world in 6 days. There was a flood that accounts for most of the geologic formation and the fossils that we see and the evidence that we see today. Old Earth creationism is, generally speaking, a beginning to a compromise with evolution. It's kind of a belief that the Earth has been around much longer than what we would think of as 6,000 to 10,000 years. And it's at the very least a beginning of, well, we need long ages of time, because science has obviously proven that there are long geologic ages. And slowly but surely, usually people who go down that road begin to incorporate evolution into the Bible, begin to kind of cut sections of the Bible out or reinterpret sections of the Bible in order to accommodate evolution or bits and pieces of evolution. So I just wanted to be clear on that term that we are using. And you will see, if you go on social media or YouTube or things like that, people will have their own channels that are dedicated, that are very hostile to this idea that God created the earth, that the Bible can actually be trusted. It is not a popular idea because, as Myron's mentioned in his class, as Pastor Caleb has talked about, that there's going to be hostility to the truth. And people don't like the fact that if I go down this road of God actually being the creator and having brought this world in 6 days, that I am responsible to that creator. And I owe him my allegiance, I owe him my life. And that means that he also gets to determine the moral code by which things are true, and by which I should live. And that means I may have to change some of the ways that I do things, and people don't like that. Again, it's kind of like the cockroaches when the light goes on, okay? They want to scurry for cover, so they like the darkness. They like being blinded by the darkness. They don't like seeing the truth, okay? And unfortunately, as science continues to develop, more and more evidence is being shown that there is a creator. It is not the opposite. It is not, well, as science continues to develop, well, clear evidence for evolution. It's actually the opposite. And you have more and more actual scientists, some who are not believers, okay, and don't believe in any kind of religion, but do begin to see, you know what, this whole thing that we were taught when we were growing up and when we were going through school, and we just accepted as a fact, doesn't really make sense or has some very serious flaws that we need to call into question. And more of those are beginning to appear. Some of them fall under what we call the intelligent design movement, and that's about as far as they're willing to go, is that there must be some kind of intelligent designer, but they're not willing to go any further than that. I was even reading an article this week talking about that idea of intelligent design, and it talked about one of the many theories that's been proposed out there for the origin of the universe. One of them that has kind of been repopularized, and I'm blanking on the name now for it, but is the idea that basically it is possible that our universe is nothing, and the reason it has life and all the right conditions is that, and we can't really explain some of the things, or we have difficulty explaining how it actually came into existence. Well, maybe the reason we can't explain life and its origins, or there are some things that we kind of stump evolutionists, is because it was cooked up in some laboratory of some highly advanced civilization, and our entire universe is a microcosm within a much larger universe that was cooked up by, I don't know, some alien race. And again, all that really does when those kind of things are thrown out there is, well, then who developed that alien race, Oh, well, maybe their universe was cooked up in another laboratory, and it keeps getting pushed back and back and back further, and really the question is never answered. How did life originate? Yeah, okay, there really is no actual answer apart from God. I can keep trying to push it back or deflect the question, but ultimately I have to at some point face that. And when I face that, I'm going to find that evolution does not have the adequate answers. What Darwin proposed many, many years ago has really fell apart, okay? And has been changed, cut, twisted, modified so many times, and even those that have been modified don't fully or adequately answer how did life originate. So today we're going to deal with a couple things, but before we do, I wanted to kind of toss out to you guys a few books, and this is just a few here that I have one. Okay, you can hold on to that. These are just a few that I have. There are quite a few different books and books every year that are being published by different creationists that are really good to, if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive. Again, we kind of did a skim the surface, kind of touch on the major concepts here. The two gold standards kind of that came out, I believe, in the 60s are these two right here, the Genesis Flood and Scientific Creationism. Both of these. This one is by, both of them have Morris. Henry Morris is kind of the grandfather of the whole creation movement, starting back in the 60s after Darwinism had really gained popularity, was now being taught in public schools, was the unquestionable scientific consensus of everybody, supposedly. He and John Whitcomb came out with the Genesis Flood, a very thick book, a lot of detail in terms of that. What science was proposing, and Darwinism was not the only explanation for how things got here, and that Christians could actually believe in God's Word, and that God's Word was true, and you could take things like the Genesis Flood, like the days of creation, and did it also fit scientifically? And so both of these books, Scientific Creationism and the Genesis Flood, kind of kick-started all that. They deal with all kinds of things, like dating methods and dealing with the idea of mutations and so on and so forth there. This one is another good book. If you have kids in any kind of schooling, this is a good one. It goes through all the modern textbooks, particularly biology textbooks, one of which we use at our school because it's a good textbook, generally speaking, in terms of biology. But it does also include evolutionary concepts in there, and they go through all the fallacies that are taught, and they even mention the pages and things like that, or the sections that they're taught in here, and they go through, here's what they teach, here's the flaws in those books, here's the pictures they show in those textbooks, and here's why they're inaccurate. And so this is very well done. It's called Evolution Exposed. This was, I think, put out by Answers in Genesis. The name is Roger Patterson there. And this is, there was an updated one. I can't remember if we have the updated one or not. That might be the updated one, I don't remember. We have 2 of them, okay? This is one of my favorite books here. It's called After Eden. This was written by Henry Morris III, so this is, we mentioned that Henry Morris is kind of the grandfather of the whole creation movement. This is his grandson, if I remember correctly. There's a whole slew of them that are involved in this creation movement, if you want to put it that way. But After Eden is a very, very simple read, but it really deals with, it kind of takes the Bible and science and how they fit together, and not only how they fit together, but how they need to fit together in order for the redemption plan to actually make sense. And so it weaves in that concept as well, that it's not just about arguing, you know, which scientific view is better or more scientific or whatever. It's an issue of how does it fit actually with the plan of redemption, and if I then take evolution and I begin to go down that road, what damage does it do to redemption and scripture there? Let's see here. Let's do it this one. There's several of those. This one is by Ken Ham. It's a famous book that he put out a number of years ago called The Lie, and it's based on, okay, what, you know, going back to the fall in Genesis chapter 3 and Satan's lie that he perpetrated in Adam and Eve, and it goes through kind of dealing with creation, evolution. Then the last 2, I'm gonna ignore those. There's a ton of them. Some are more technical than others. Actually, this one right here. This I got from, actually I got a chance to go to the Ark Encounter there in Kentucky. If you ever get a chance to that, it'd be a wonderful thing. But this book right here kind of goes through a proposed, and some of it's artist rendering and things like that, but a proposed ideas of how they could have built the ark and watered and fed the animals from our modern understanding of things. What they could have done, and shows you diagrams, and it gives you kind of a good idea of how vast the ark was, how they could have stored things in a very feasible way, how they could have gotten rid of, what are some different proposals, how they could have gotten rid of animal waste, things like that. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful book with a lot of pictures for those of you who like pictures. This one is one of a couple books I think that is great. And it's a topic that we have not dealt with, but it's The Genius of Ancient Man, which kind of takes a very different approach, something we don't think about a lot of times. The assumption that we all have is that when we get and we talk about ancient man was what?
Ancient, dumb, didn't know.
Yeah, dumb, you know, caveman, be a caveman, ooh, fire, you know. You know, that's about, you know, his intellect. And that's not actually what we see in archaeology. In archaeology, we can go back thousands of years to these ancient civilizations, and some of them were building and creating things that are, we still today don't have a full explanation of how they put these things together. You know, sometimes we point to things like pyramids, but there's other things in the pyramids. There's things that are fit together so precisely that even with laser leveling, okay, and whatever, today, we still kind of are blown away, even with our equipment today. How did they do that if these guys were dummies? How did they manage to do this? There's evidence of kind of early, or if you want to say kind of mini computers in a sense, using gears and mechanisms and things like that. There's even possibility, not able to prove it, that at some point in time man might have been able to fly, okay, or had flight capabilities. You know, in the past, okay, and so this goes through and kind of talks about some of the different evidences that we have in terms of building and places where we find that throughout archaeological evidence, that man was not some dumb idiot evolved from the apes, and slowly now here we are, you know, man is now a genius in all our architectural wonders, and that we're evolving in intellect over time. But one of the evidences that would point to the truth of the Bible would be that man was actually probably genetically superior in terms of his intelligence back towards creation. Adam and Eve, when they were created in an unfallen state. Okay, their mental capacity was probably far superior to ours today, as slowly, okay, over time, genetic decay, okay, and all that kind of stuff, we have slowly, okay, physically and mentally deteriorated. That what man was able to accomplish maybe during the time of Noah, when man was living 800, 900 years, okay, and the wisdom that they were able to build up. Who knows what they were doing and what they had accomplished prior to the flood. Okay? Now, a lot of that inventions and technology would have been lost in the flood, but within that, prior to the flood, mankind's intellect and his ability to create and build, okay, could have been vast, okay? And then civilizations that were constructed after that. We see a lot of evidence of the genius of man, not dumb, evolved simpletons, you know, who were scared of their own shadow, and, you know, fire lit up and they didn't know what to make of it, you know, or something like that. So I think that's a good book to look in. It's called The Genius of Ancient Man, and there's another one, and I'm not blanking. Kevin, do you remember what that other one was? I'm totally blanking. That went along with that.
Yeah. The Puzzle of Ancient Man.
The Puzzle of Ancient Man. There we go. And so it's a similar idea, but that one's more of a, yeah, kind of a thicker read along. This one's a little bit simpler with pictures and things like that to show you evidence along the way. So that's there's a lot of other things out there. There's some books that are very detailed that go into genetics, now that we've kind of delved into that realm, that expand a lot on that. There are a ton of books that are resources out there. Two of my favorite websites to go to are answersingenesis.org or ICR.org. ICR is the Institute for Creation Research. They used to be, when I was growing up, based down here in San Diego for many years, and they had a building and you could go in and visit and all that kind of stuff. And then they moved out to, I believe it's Texas, and as everybody seems to move out to Texas. And they've been based out there since then, and there are a number of scientists who work with some of their programs there. So those are kind of the two biggies that deal with a number of scientists who work with them, publish articles for those organizations. Today, we're going to deal with kind of three quick topics, and I have no idea what the blue thing is doing. It did not show up in when I originally think, so I don't know where it came from. But we're going to deal with vestigial organs, homology, and embryology. These are three topics or concepts that have been put into textbooks, have been pushed out there as evidence that evolution is true. And so it's just kind of want to make you aware of these ideas if you ever hear of them. Some of them have fallen into disuse because they've been shown to be either a fraud or evidence has been shown that this is inaccurate. One of those is vestigial organs. Now you still see at times vestigial organs either found or mentioned in textbooks occasionally. Sometimes even doctors have promoted this idea, which is kind of sad because you would think they would know better. So let's kind of start with defining what a vestigial organ is. Supposedly they are quote unquote useless organs that are left over from a former evolutionary stage. That's what supposedly a vestigial organ is this useless organ that's found in a human body or an animal body or maybe even something in a plant that is left over. It has no use anymore, but it did due to some earlier evolutionary stage, and as we've evolved past the need for whatever that is, then it just kind of was left over there, and it's slowly maybe going to wither away, and you know, we can look at that and see that's evidence of evolution. Now, just to kind of give you some background, originally Darwin, I want to say, came up with, I want to say it was around 40 vestigial organs. He was the first to kind of mention this. And then after him, it got upwards of 80. And then by the time you got around the Scopes monkey trial, okay, that famous or infamous, however we want to phrase it, it was about supposedly 180 vestigial organs in the human body alone. So this is not counting other animals or plants or any kind of other organ. This is just in the human body. Supposedly there were 180 vestigial organs that were supposedly there. Okay, and these could be simple things like ear muscles. Okay, maybe ear lobes. It could be the appendix is a big one. Tonsils were one that at one point in time. Wisdom teeth. Okay, some of the glands. Okay, pituitary gland. I want to say thymus gland was in there. Let me double check. I didn't write it down. Oh, the pineal gland was another one. Thymus gland, yes, was another one that at different points in time were considered to be not useful, that had no point in the human body. Now we know a little bit better, obviously, as medical research has gone on, that those different organs actually do have a use. Can we get by without some of them? Yes. Can we have our wisdom teeth removed, and can you still chew and eat food?
Yes.
Yes. Do they have a use?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you can see how this can be not only a flawed and errant concept, but it can also be a dangerous philosophy. And the idea that, oh, well, if it's useless, we can just remove it, right? And it won't harm the body. And yeah, okay, no, if these organs actually do have a use, and there is actually a purpose that God put them in there for, by removing them, that could actually hamper the ability of the body to function or function well. And so the reality is, these organs are not vestigial at all. Okay, they were not leftover remnants. But the reality is simply, and this, you would think that scientists who are going down this road would know this, that science does not have all the answers right up front. But rather, over time, we discover things. We didn't know about the law of gravity. Does that mean the law of gravity didn't exist until Sir Isaac Newton came along?
He invented it.
Yeah, he didn't invent it. Okay, I always love it when my students, talk about, well, Ben Franklin invented electricity. Well, no, okay?
He did.
Even if you want to give him credit for discovering it, which is, you can debate one way or the other, okay? But let's even assume that that's true, okay? He didn't invent it, he discovered it, okay? Nobody but God invented electricity, okay? Nobody but God invented gravity, okay? We may go through many, many years of not understanding how something, or not being aware of something, okay? And that's just human ignorance. That's just part of, we don't know yet, and we learn over time as we obey the creation mandate, as we discover and we look to rule and subdue over the earth using the tools that God has given us. Then we discover these things. And over time, okay, over the last 150, 200 years, we've begun to discover what some of the uses of these organs are. Matter of fact, now we know almost all of them. Okay? Are we discovering more parts of the human body that maybe, not really sure what this is exactly used for, or we don't understand all the uses? Yes, okay. Does that mean it doesn't have a use just because we discover something and then we don't really know what it's used for? No, okay, it has a use. Okay? We just may not know what it is yet. So ignorance of something is not an argument for evolution. Matter of fact, that's a really foolish direction to go. Ignorance simply means that we don't know yet. Okay, and the key word is yet. Over time, will we discover these things. Absolutely. Okay. I don't remember if I put some. Okay, yes, I did. Some examples were the appendix there. We now know, okay, that, well, yes, can we remove the appendix, do an appendectomy? I just had a student who had to have that happen recently. You know, he left school thinking he was sick, had a lot of stomach pain. We found out it was a little bit more than stomach pain, so he had to emergency surgery. Obviously, we don't want an appendix bursting. That can be really bad and dangerous and deadly for the human body. On the other hand, does that mean it's a useless organ? No, okay, the appendix has a very, very important role in the immune system. It produces a lot of good bacteria, okay, to fight bad bacteria in the body as one of its roles there. And so it has a very important role there where it's positioned, especially next to the colon, which has a lot of high bacterial content to kind of combat that. And so it has an important role and function. Can your body get along without it? Yes, okay? But your body works even better with it. Okay, now not if it's bursting, okay, but generally speaking, a normal human body works better with an appendix. So just to say, well, we can remove it, so therefore we can remove a lot of things, it doesn't mean your body will function really well. Oh, the next one is one of my favorite. Oh, did I skip it or not? Oh, I put it up here. Oh, here it is. Yes, I had it out of order on my notes. This is the tailbone or the coccyx. Okay. This is a funny one because I'm sure you've all felt your tailbone at some point in time when you've fallen on it and it's not been pleasant, okay, or bruised it. That's always fun. Trying to move around for the next few days. And the proposal by evolutionary view was, oh, well, this is just, I mean, what's a tailbone for? Why do humans need a tailbone? You know, what's the point? Oh, we know it's a leftover remnant from our ancient ancestors, the apes, who had a tail, and as that tail kind of got shorter and shorter, and we just walked on two legs, and we didn't need a tail for balance anymore, and so on and so forth. You had these little, you know, small pieces that were attached to your vertebrae that we call a coccyx or a tailbone that were actually little remnants or a stub of what was once a tail. See, proof of evolution. Has no function in the human body, except that it actually does, okay? Well, other than pain when you fall on it, okay? What does the coccyx do? What? No. Stability. Actually, yeah, it does help with stability, okay? It does help with balance, okay, there, and support, okay, in the human body. I suppose you could cut it out and remove it, but then you would definitely not function anywhere near, you would have trouble, you know, pivoting and balancing and all those other kind of things. So really what this points to is that just because we don't believe something had a function way back when, these are all things that God designed, and just because we don't know what they're designed for, all of these 180 organs, plus all the other ones that we did know had a purpose, are designed to have an incredible function in the human body and to support and sustain life. It's one of the first things you learn in biology when you take biology class. Same thing with tonsils here. Tonsils, oh, well, we can just cut them out. You know, let's do a tonsillectomy. I know during my parents' era, that was kind of a big deal. Oh, your tonsils are hurting, let's cut them out. You know, because they were assumed that they did nothing. Now, doctors are much more hesitant to remove tonsils unless there's actually a serious issue and repeated infections and those kind of things. I've had tonsillitis, and I think twice since we were married. I had tonsillitis twice, and it is extremely painful. But they are really, really hesitant now to remove them because they know that tonsils are kind of your first guards in terms of your immune system, okay, and protecting your your body, you know, there. Now, if you want to, this is a complete side trail. Now, if you want to hear a real funny thing, Bill Cosby does a reel on a tonsillectomy. It's one of his best whole things. So if you want to listen to Bill Cosby and the tonsillectomy, that's a great one. Okay, there, it's kind of amusing. But that was a complete rabbit trail that had nothing to do with our lesson today. But now we know, again, that tonsils have a very important function. And one of the cool things that you learn if you take biology is that all of these different organs within the body, all of these different systems have one basic purpose with the exception of one system, okay? And what is that function?
Immunity?
No. Come on, boys. You were there in the shiplets
What are you talking
biology
about?
class. Oh my gosh, put the book
We
down.
talked about tonsils.
No.
Wait,
Organs,
what's-
organs,
oh.
organs, organ systems. What's their purpose, overall purpose? All of them except one system. I am so gonna tell the shiplet on you. Okay, it's to maintain life. It's to maintain life. Okay, that's the goal of everything in your body is to maintain life. Sometimes we call it homeostasis. Okay, to keep the body functioning as it supposedly is. The body should not have all these wild, random fluctuations. Okay, to maintain body temperature, to maintain all these different kinds of things within your body so that it keeps functioning and you have backup systems upon backup systems upon backup systems, okay, in your body. Everything that we have really points to an incredible, incredible amount of design, not sheer random chance mutations over time. The more you study biology, and in particular the human body, it is mind-blowing the incredible machine that it is, starting at the cellular level and moving all the way up to the body systems itself, and how all these systems work together and are compatible together and are necessary together, that I can't remove any one particular system minus one. Okay? And what's the one system we can kind of do without? Okay, the reproductive system. Okay? The reproductive system is the one that it is not involved in maintaining life or maintaining homeostasis. It's involved in reproducing life, okay, and propagating life. It's the one different system there. Okay, so all of that said, that really this is not a good evidence of evolution. Another thing they sometimes point to is birds with wings that can't fly. So you have, you know, things like your ostrich, or I guess penguins, you know, things like that. They would point to kiwis. These, you know, oh well, see, you know, here you have some birds that have wings that can't fly, and they're vestigial. They're left over from evolution. Except here's a big flaw in that. Okay, whole system. We already said this, so I'm skipping this one. And that is this: even if vestigial organs exist, so even if we said they did, okay, yeah, you've got birds with wings that can't fly, vestigial leftover organ from some ancient ancestor, that would not be proof of evolution, but rather de-evolution. Okay? It's the exact opposite. Okay, wait a minute, birds are supposed to be getting more and more advanced, and they're supposed to be evolving from these flightless reptiles to birds with wings that can fly and be superior and being able to hunt down. Not the opposite. Not having wings that can fly and soar above, and then now it can't. That's the wrong direction. That's de-evolution. That's not evolution. So again, even if I buy into this idea of vestigial organs and say, yes, those are okay, those are true, it's not a proof of evolution, it's a proof of de-evolution. It's the opposite direction. So if anything, it does harm to the whole evolutionary thought and concept. And so, once again, we have something that they point to. See, let's put it in textbooks, and we have the little pictures. But it's not actually evidence of evolution at all. Okay, and we just mentioned we should see organs improving, not becoming worthless. Okay, that's the opposite of what evolution says is happening. According to the whole theory of evolution, the whole point is that we are, as genetic mutations happen, we don't see organs becoming useless. We see improvements in those organs so that they now have a functional advantage over whatever the previous organism was. So they are more fit to survive. So whatever that might be, that it is that they're evolving, they're adding some new component, some new organ as a function, not deleting old useless organs. It's the complete opposite of what the theory of evolution is.
No, John.
Yes, George?
The design of fire sent me a couple of magazines, and in one describes how our father created each and every of each organ and the function of each organ.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yes. And God's design is, I would say this, having taught science for a number of years, I am still in awe every time I teach it, and the more I learn, and there's a lot more that I have to learn, I am still in awe as we discover more and more things about how incredibly the human body functions, how chemistry, and things hold together, and how they are knit together. It is just mind-blowing, our universe. And to say it came about by accident just does not make sense at all. And that people would buy into that and then say it's science, and that science is fact. Where's your evidence for that? There is not any good evidence, particularly when you're talking about observational science, which is what we should be operating on. We don't observe it. And so we can't say that it's fact. We can't prove it. We can't test it. We can't repeat all these things. So really, what is it? It's a worldview. It's a worldview that says, I don't want to believe in God, so therefore I'm going to believe in this other thing. So it's a belief is what it is. Okay, if you're going to tell me that, I can live with that. It's your belief. You're choosing to believe this, but don't tell me it's science, because it's not. All right, the next one, I just want to make us aware of this, because this is part of the history of evolution, and it has really impacted several different areas, but one probably more so than anything else, and that is embryology and recapitulation. There's a saying, and I want to say it was Ernst Haeckel, who was kind of a Darwin's bulldog, and a big proponent. He was, I believe, a zoologist, and when Darwin came out with his theory, he really kind of ran with Darwin's concepts, and we're going to see something that he did here in a minute. But he came out with a saying called ontology recapitulates phylogeny. A lot of fancy words. We're going to explain what that means in just a second. But basically, this is saying the idea that the human embryo repeats. That's what recapitulation is, kind of this idea of repeats or goes through the phases of evolution as it develops in the womb. And basically the idea was, well, as the human embryo develops in the womb, okay, or really any embryo, it goes through these phases of evolution, these evolutionary stages supposedly all the way back. Because we all start as a single cell. And then single cell develops into multiple cells. And all of this came from originally kind of Ernst Haeckel was really the one who kind of pushed this, promoted this, drew pictures of this. And we're going to talk about kind of what happened with those pictures that he drew of the different embryos, that you kind of go from this, as the embryo develops, In its early stages, it kind of looks something funky like a fish. And so you go from, okay, there you're in this watery substance in your mother's womb, and you go from a single cell to multiple cells to kind of this fish-like thing, okay? So you can see at stages of evolution, of course, early cells to fish to the next one was some kind of amphibian reptile-looking embryo, okay, and then ultimately, of course, a mammal type reptile or mammal type fetus within the womb. And let's see here. This is an erroneous belief started by Ernst Haeckel. He was really enamored by Darwin's explanation of how the world could have gotten here, and then he took it and kind of really ran with it. And he manipulated several pieces of evidence to prove his theory. And I really am using the word theory loosely there. See if we have a picture here. And he's most well known for falsifying drawings of human embryos to make them look like other organisms. So here's kind of his drawings here.
Wait, where's the fish? I only see a seahorse.
Well, this would be kind of the fish stage here, supposedly. And we're going to see here in a second kind of what, okay? This turned out to be a fraud, and it didn't take too long. Even in his lifespan, it did not take too long for other scientists to kind of like, I don't know about that. Okay, that's not actually what's, we actually see in embryos. There's some fudging that's going on here. But despite that, this did actually, even though within his time span, scientists of his time period said, nah, this isn't right, and it was proven to be fraudulent, and eventually he himself even came out and said, well, I may have, due to sake of time and expediency, kind of maybe got a little bit quicker and kind of fudged some things along the way. These things ended up in textbooks for quite a few years. You don't see them in textbooks as much, but the idea is still sometimes pushed. So while the pictures have been removed, okay, from textbooks, then they never should have been in textbooks, but they did get in textbooks for quite a few years. And then once the pictures were kind of removed, still the idea is talking about, even all the way up into the 1970s, okay, and beyond, okay, this idea still keeps reappearing, even though all the way back in the 1800s this was proved no. Okay, and here's some of the, I don't know that I even need to say anything. Here's kind of some of what he was kind of pointing to in a developing human embryo. Some of what he did, okay, in his drawings that you can see, he kind of removed some kind of important things that are in there and left out to make it look more fish-like, okay, or whatever, as opposed to kind of some of the stuff that's actually in there that's in the process of developing there. So, people would look, oh, well, yeah, okay, fish, yeah, okay. And okay, you're telling me it's got gills, or oh, okay, instead of, oh, well, this is actually what it looks like, and here's all the different parts that are developing slowly, conveniently removing or eliminating, so I can draw a fraudulent drawing there. So that kind of was Ernst Haeckel there and his promotion. Now, unfortunately, you can imagine this had a huge, huge impact upon the idea that, well, if what's developing in a woman's womb is not really a human life, it's just kind of going through the phases of evolution, then what does that give me license to do? Abortion, yeah, to kill it, because I'm not really killing a human. Okay, I'm merely getting rid of a fish, or whatever else, it might be something that's going through these stages of evolution. And as a result, this had a massive impact upon the abortion industry and the whole push towards that for the last century. We're not just talking about in the 1970s when Roe versus Wade and all that went down. We're talking about over the last 100 years, this lie had a huge impact in pushing and just viewing, well, because of what he did and because of what he drew and because it had made it into textbooks, well, really what's developing in a woman's womb is not really actually a living being. It's just going through these phases and stages, so it's perfectly okay to kill it. Okay? And the reality is, no, it is a living being, and so killing anything in the womb is just like killing it outside the womb. It is murder, period, end of story. Has nothing to do with a woman's right to choose, okay, or her body, or whatever you want to call it, and maybe I'll get in trouble for saying that here, But the reality is, no, murder is murder. Ending a life is ending a life. Whether it's in a womb, outside a womb, it does not matter. Let's call it what it is. Let's stop calling it abortion. Let's call it murder, because that is exactly what it is. It's an infanticide. I can't say it now. Infanticide, yes. Okay.
The ultrasound helped undo a lot of that. So.
Yes, and that's a huge blessing is modern technology, and especially now that we have the 3D ultrasounds where you can see all the different features and things like that. That has been a wonderful boon, to the saving the life of infants, movement.
It's interesting to me that even the pro-abortion side has to admit to their own lunacy in that if a woman is attacked, struck, and loses a child she wants to carry to term, the person that attacked her can be charged with murder of a child. But if she doesn't,
or a double murder,
if the mother and child both die, but if she wants it, it's suddenly human. So,
but if she doesn't, then it's not human. Which, okay, so you wanting something makes something human or not? Absolutely not.
So the fallacy is shown in our own legal system by how we view that.
It's flawed. Yeah, Matthew.
Why don't they just use like frogs? Because they go egg, fish, legs on fish, tail disappears. Frog.
I think Haeckel's ultimate point was to pinpoint through the process of human development and tie us with all the other stages. And again, it's completely flawed.
And isn't it too fast for evolution?
Yes, but again, what he's trying to show is that in that process of developing in the womb, that we kind of sort of went through these phases of evolution in the process of developing. Was it completely bogus? Absolutely. Was he even in his own time shown to be completely fraudulent? Yes. But one of the interesting things, and we talked about this when we talked about transitional forms, that happens with evolution is even when something is proven fraudulent, it will appear in textbooks and stay in textbooks for many years. Okay, we talked about that with, I think it was Piltdown Man, okay, which was a complete hoax and fraud, and up until I think it was the 1950s, it continued to be in textbooks, which was about a 30-year time span, I think it was, during which you would think, and once it was found out, it was found to be a pretty obvious hoax, but scientists had written, I'm trying to remember, I think it was over 200 that I mentioned, essays and papers, on this wonderful transitional form, and not one scientist bothered to take a look at it and like, wow, this doesn't make sense at all. It's obviously chemically treated and, clearly, the jawbone of one thing and the skull of another thing that have been fused together. Why did we never pick up on that? Because they so much wanted to believe in it. Okay, they were willing for 30 years to buy into a complete hoax and a lie, put it and publish it in textbooks, and then all of a sudden, when it was found out it wasn't true, it still stays in textbooks for a while. Eventually, do we kind of pull it out, but it's okay if a lie continues. And again, it's kind of the old, if you tell a lie, enough times and bold enough, then people believe that lie, And then I really don't don't care whether the lie is true or not, because people are good, because I'm convinced that my way is truth. And so if along the way I have to sell you a little bit of lie to convince you of the truth, that's okay.
You know, a lot of it, I've worked with a lot of pretty high-end guys, and so much is driven by grants, they don't care. Most of science today is driven by grants. I was reading this morning coming in, there's 9 million, California's got the most students in the country, like 9 million students in schools here. And the things on the textbooks, how they don't want to change the textbook. California is driving the creation of the textbooks because this is the biggest market. So they're publishing the textbooks to fit this market, and then it gets distributed nationwide. It was all about the LGBT BS. So it's not about, a lot of what you see over time has nothing to do with science. It's all driven strictly by grants.
Very much.
Follow the money.
The last thing we're going to kind of touch on is what's called homology. And homo meaning same. Okay, so this is the idea of sameness or similarity, okay, in something. And the definition is basically it's the study of similarities in the structures of creatures. Okay? Could be animals, could be humans. And so the question kind of is, many animals have similarities in structure, and the question is, what do these organisms have in common? So you kind of see here, picture, you have a different leg or arms there, and evolutionists would point to some of these and say, oh, well, there's a similarity in structure. They have similar joints, okay, in terms of how they move. So the conclusion from an evolutionist is,
They evolved
Yeah.
together.
okay, they came from a similar or common ancestor. Okay, so what they have, so if I go back here for a second here, okay, the question being, what do these organisms have in common? Well, if I'm coming from an evolutionary standpoint, and again, this is where the worldview comes in to play. Well, my answer to that question, what do they have in common as I look at these? Because I know evolution is true, therefore, they must have in common a common ancestor. Somewhere in their ancient past, you know, when they began to branch off, they had this functional design already in common, so as one went this way and one went this way, they still all had those particular joints or movement or whatever it might be. So that would be kind of the explanation of the evolutionists. The other explanation, the other explanation is creation, which would say, well, the reason things have something in common is because they have a common designer. And there is something called economics of function, okay? An elbow joint, okay, or a joint bends a certain way or moves a certain way because that's the best way for that to function. And so whether it's a, you know, animal or whether it's a human or whatever, okay, are they going to be similar, okay, not identical, but are they going to be similar in how they move and how they function? Okay, is a hip joint, generally speaking, going to be similar in its function? Yes, okay, because they have a common designer, and that designer, if he's an all-wise, all-knowing God, is he going to understand the best way to make a hip joint or an elbow joint, okay, or something like that? Is he going to understand that the best way, generally speaking, you can look at a lot of animals and creatures, and you have, if you're looking at an arm bone, you have one bone here, and then it splits into two bones here. Okay, that's pretty common amongst most creatures. Well, why is that? Okay, well, either they evolved from a common ancestor, or there was a common designer who understood the idea of utility of function, that is the best design for creatures, and so therefore, if that's the best design, then all the creatures that are designed, I'm going to give them that function. Okay, so either it's speaking to the character of God, and so really it boils down to an issue of worldview. And the problem then comes, how do we really answer which one best fits the evidence? Because both answers are actually logical. They're both logical answers, you know. Saying they came from a common ancestor, that's a logical statement. Saying they came from a common designer, that's a logical statement. Okay? Really, what it comes down to is which worldview do I believe in? Now, say this. If I believe in creation, I can really kind of stop right there. I don't need to do any more explaining. Because did God create all the different kinds? But is he going to have an economy of function there in terms of as he designs? He doesn't need to design, 5 bajillion different types of parts because, hey, if a joint works a certain way for one thing, can it work, the same way for something else? And if I'm an almighty God who knows everything and that's the best way to design something, then okay, let's use that. Okay? An economy of function. I don't need to reinvent, the wheel, in a manner of speaking. I don't need to go any further because I don't have any transitional forms, or anything like that to explain. I have all the different kinds, and it's an easy explanation with common designer, utility, or economy of function. On the other hand, evolution has 2 big problems. Let's see, I think I put up here. When it comes to this, the answer is logical, but there are some things that I have to explain. One is what's called convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is this. When there is a similarity between organisms, so there's a convergence between 2 organisms, but there's no direct link on the evolutionary tree. Okay, so how did these 2 organisms get a common, something that we would look at and say, there's something that they have in common, but they actually have nothing in common? Well, that's a problem for evolution to explain, because if supposedly the reason or the answer is they have this function, an elbow joint or whatever it might be, or bone structure in terms of a single bone, 2 bones here, because they had a common ancestor, but according to the evolutionary tree where all these branches are, they don't descend from a common ancestor. Why do they have something that's in common? That becomes really difficult to explain, and that's called convergence. In other words, 2 organisms converge in their similarities, but they don't have a common function. The other is called divergent evolution. Yes, you guessed it. There. And that is kind of the opposite, where you have 2 organisms that are supposedly similar or related on the evolutionary tree. So if you look at the evolutionary tree, where it branches off and different things. So 2 organisms that are supposedly related to one another, so they should have similar function and body parts and things like that, but instead they have things that are very different from one another. Okay, then how did they get those body parts or functions that are so different from one another?
Spontaneous combustion.
Something, yeah. Okay, it's an answer that's very difficult to answer, and both of these present very serious problems. While it is a logical answer here in terms to say that, yes, common ancestor, so can you have common body parts? Yes, that makes logical sense. But then when I look at my evolutionary tree and I see organisms that are similar and don't have common features, now I have some explaining to do. Or the opposite, where I have my evolutionary tree and I have 2 things that are not related at all, but they do have common characteristics. How do I explain that? Now I'm stuck. Whereas creation has no problem because it's a common designer, and I'm going to design certain things, but along the way of designing, am I going to give certain creatures according to their own kind very unique features? And that's part of the designer's creativity that we see. There's no problems, in terms of explanation when it comes to creation and explaining what we call homology here. So that's kind of a conclusion to our kind of run through of evolution and creation. And again, there's more depth that you can dive into these with. There are more topics that you can kind of delve into, but what I tried to hit on are kind of some of the biggies along the way, to give you maybe a little bit just to think on, to ponder on, to maybe equip you so that you can defend God's word. And that's really the key thing that I want us to understand out of here. That it's a worldview fight is really what it is. It's a worldview of either God's word is true and 100% accurate, and that's what I believe, or I don't believe God's word is true, and that I can only explain this world in naturalistic terms. It is not an issue of science versus religion. Not at all. Because evolution is not science. It's a belief system. Now, can you use science to investigate both of these? Sure. Okay? And to look at pieces of evidence. Okay? But I would tend to say that I think when you use science to investigate what we see around us in the world, time and time again, it will point to the Bible being accurate and being true. And then that's part of God's testimony that he tells us that the creation will scream of a creator, that it will proclaim, okay, the heavens declare the glory of God. We looked at Romans chapter 1, okay, where it talked about that he designed creation to give testimony to him, and that it is only people suppressing the truth, okay, and wanting to live in their own ungodliness, okay, that will come to some other conclusion. And unfortunately, that's much of the world today, that they want to live in their own ungodliness and be blind to the truth, and they, not blind to the truth, to suppress the truth, to actively resist it so that they can live and do what they want to do. And that's ultimately really what the choice is all about. Next week, Myron is going to be taking over again, and we'll be picking up in Matthew chapter 6, I believe is where we left off. And so continuing with the Sermon on the Mount. So look forward to that. What?
And then on to 1 Corinthians.
Then on to 1 Corinthians. Still staying away from the Old Testament.